Good morning, guys. We're out here on the lake and we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about finding bass in the fall if you do not have live scope. Now, most of you guys do have some sort of electronics, either down scan, like 2D, or maybe even side scan. And right now, the bass are obviously on the move, the bait fish are on the move. So we're going to discuss how to quickly find them and then how to catch those fish without live scope, because a lot of emphasis is being put on this live scope technology. It is new, there's a lot of hype around it. It is useful, but as far as finding fish, I don't think it is the best tool you have in your arsenal. Now guys, during the fall transition, the bass do a lot of things. You can kind of catch them doing a myriad of techniques. You can throw moving baits, you can throw jigs, you can throw drop shots and things of that nature. But by and large, a majority of the bass are going to be relating to bait fish. They're no longer going to be relating to structure like brush piles. They might not even be on docks. They're going to be focused on where those big schools of herring and shad are. So the important thing is to find them. So how do you find herring and shad, particularly on a cloudy day like this, where you might not see the flickering of bait fish at the surface, where you might not see birds crashing on schools of fish? Where do you find these schools of bait fish if you do not have live scope? Now we're going to go ahead and make the assumption that most of you guys have side scanning at your console. Now if you do have side scan at your console, it is actually a more useful tool for finding schools of bait than live scope. Live scope requires you standing up and panning around, whereas if you're using your side scan imaging, and you can be on the outboard and simply drive through a creek, and if you have it set to 100 feet to the left, 100 feet to the right, you're going to be able to cover a much broader area much quicker. Now, once you put your trolling motor down, if you have live scope, and I do not, but if you have live scope, you can utilize that tool to target specific fish. But we are specifically looking and searching for bait fish right now. We're looking for areas where bass are going to be during the fall transition. And during this fall transition, by and large, they are going to be positioned around this bait. They're going to be pushing them towards the backs of the creeks. Now, depending on the water temperature and obviously weather, that's going to dictate where the bait is in that transition. So what I usually like to do is start at the mouth of a creek and kind of push back all the way to the shallow area to just kind of determine where a majority of the bait is. Now, you may find that there is bait throughout the creek, which is fantastic. That's going to allow you to kind of fish your strengths and do whatever you want to do. But by and large, there's going to be a section of that creek where they're going to be positioned, or you're going to notice that, hey, on those points in that creek, that's where the bait is, or maybe they're in the backs of the little pockets on the creek arms. But there's going to be specific areas where the bait's going to be more concentrated, and that's what we're looking for. Now, if you don't have side scan imaging, I don't want you to be discouraged, because there are a lot of visual clues that help us as anglers if you are observant. Now, one of them are birds, and I don't mean diving seagulls, although that's a fantastic way to find bait. I'm specifically referring to the greatest fisherman on the planet, and that's the blue heron. Now, a lot of times when you see a blue heron, you'll notice that it's positioned on a specific area, either a point, maybe they're halfway back, maybe they're all the way in the backs of the pockets in super shallow water. But make a note of where they're positioned. Then the next time you see a blue heron, where is it positioned? Is it in the same location, or is it someplace different? Most of the time you're going to notice that heron will set up on specific structure, and they'll do it fairly consistently. They will either go from point to point or from pocket to pocket. Sometimes you might notice them on laydowns. Clue in on that. The other thing that you have to pay attention to, and it's often a sign of high concentrations of bait and bass are flickering on the water. Now, if you might not see bass blowing up, but if you see flickering, well, chances are there's bass underneath that flickering that's pushing them towards the surface. So pay attention to those things if you don't have electronics. So where do you focus your side scanning? Where do you start looking? Well, obviously starting at the mouth of a creek, near a point, near a transition point, near secondary points, basically staging areas where the bait fish are going to stop and basically position themselves, making that transition towards their winter haunts. So I generally look for rocky, steep transitions leading into creeks or at the mouths of creeks, and I will push back from there, going all the way into the shallow sections. Sometimes, particularly on sunny days, that bait fish will go straight to the back of these cuts. Now, when I say cuts, I'm referring to pockets, creek arms, anything. But I do find that areas that have some deep water and that also might have water runoff, a creek leading into the pocket or some sort of drainage, oftentimes they're just higher percentage areas when looking for bait fish, because the bait fish are going to be feeding on the little microorganisms that are coming out of that water runoff. So it's a good place to start your search. There's our first one, guys. Obviously not the right species we're looking for, but we saw bait, we saw individual bass feeding on that bait. Spun the boat around and hooked up with a nice hybrid. See if we can get another one. Now, there are a lot of different baits that imitate small herring or shad. You can utilize a crankbait or a swim bait. A spinnerbait, chatterbait, if it's really windy, is useful. But by and large, I find things like an A-rig and a small swim bait to be the best choices. Other baits include a jerk bait or an underspin, and sometimes I'll even utilize a drop shot. However, the bait I use on my drop shot is a small swim bait. So again, everything's kind of mimicking shad. There you go. So there you go, guys. Find the bait. Keep your eyes open. Look at your 2D and your side scan imaging. Throw moving baits that imitate shad, and you will catch fish. Now, this one's not a big one, but I think a lot of guys would love to start out their tournament day with something like this. So, a pound and 3/4. So that's it, guys. You don't need the live scope to find the bait. You just need to use standard electronics. Focus on creek arms, particularly if they have water flowing into them. Look for bait, look for birds, stay dynamic, move around a lot, because the bait's going to move too. And you guys will get on them and hopefully catch more fish. I'm Matt, and hopefully we see you next time out on the water.